Finally put, friends, let me just tell you, it's not worth it. Someone says, yeah, but these fleshly sins, these carnal practices, Cliff, they're pleasurable. The Bible doesn't deny that. That's what's interesting to me. In Hebrews 11 and verse 25, when we reflect back to Moses and his great example of old, we read of the man Moses that he was choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. See, the great difference, one of the many, or one of the infinite differences between our God and our enemy, the devil, is that God tells you the whole truth. Satan, all he wants to tell you is that, hey, if you did this, this would be fun. And if you participated in that, you would enjoy that. This is pleasurable. I mean, this is why so many folks are doing it, because they're having a good time. And that's all Satan wants you to know. That's all Satan wants to tell you. God acknowledges in His Word that there are pleasures associated with sin. We just read that from Hebrews 11 and verse 25. But unlike the adversary, unlike the one who seeks your destruction, God, and I mean no disrespect, but we're reminded of Paul Harvey when we consider God in this life. Because what did Paul Harvey want to give you? The rest of the story. God gives you the whole story. God says the pleasures of sin are but for a season. They're so transient. They're so fleeting. They're so temporal. They're so not worth it. Holiness has a perspective toward the future. I'm choosing to live the Christian life. I'm choosing to be who I'm striving to be, because I know in the future, heaven will surely be worth it all. We could have had a sermon tonight and a song, couldn't we? Heaven will surely be worth it all. Number 3, go with me to chapter 4. We've talked about holiness and its perspective toward the past. Every one of us has a past. We've spoken about holiness and its perspective toward the future. Every one of us has a future, either one of hope or one of horror. But then in chapter 4, this is probably the most practical of our 3 points. And maybe in this way it's good that we conclude with this point. Because, you know, the fact of the matter is you can sit here tonight for 40 or 45 minutes. You can listen to this sermon, be reminded maybe of some things that you've known, but maybe you haven't thought about in a while. But when it's all said and done, we're leaving here tonight, Lord willing. Here in just a little while, we're going to walk out of these doors. We're going to get back into our cars. We're going to go back to our homes. And then if the Lord wills, we'll get up in the morning and we'll be right back to our daily walks of life. We'll be right back at work surrounded with non-Christians. We'll be right back at school with our friends and our classmates who don't have the foggiest idea of what life is really all about. We're going to go back to life tomorrow. We're going to go. And so maybe it's good that our third and final point is the most practical. Here it is. I want us to say some things about holiness and its perspective toward the world. The world. This realm of unsaved people who are around us on every hand, who live life according to a distinctly different philosophy than do you and I. According to 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Now what's in the world, John? How do people in the world, John, how do they live? Verse 16, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, they follow that. The lust of the eyes, they follow that. The pride of life, they base their actions in that. All of those things are not of the Father, John writes, but are of the world. Now we'll move into chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, let's just begin at verse 1. For as much then as Christ hath suffered for us in the flesh, that's the true grace of God, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. For he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin. Typically speaking, the world does not turn on its own, typically speaking. If you're being persecuted for your faith, you know why that is? Because you have faith. That's why. If you're suffering for righteousness' sake, do you know why that is? Because you're righteous. And so as I've already shared with you earlier in this meeting, this is somewhat of a token. He that suffers in the flesh, that is a token symbolizing the fact that this man or this woman has broken with sin. They have ceased from sin. Perfectly? No, they're not perfect. But they are now living faithfully. And in living faithfully, they have chosen to break with sin. And the world reacts to that through persecution. The world is uncomfortable, and Peter's about to tell us just how uncomfortable the world is with our righteousness. Verse 2, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lust of men, but to the will of God. There's two potential meanings here to this idea in verse 2. You no longer live the rest of your time in the flesh to the lust of men. That means one of two things. Perhaps maybe it means both. Number one, it can mean that you no longer live your life in the same lust that characterized men in general. The lust of men. The lust that characterized the unconverted world. You no longer live in that. You no longer live that way. And truly, if it's not taught here in verse 2, that's taught throughout the Scriptures. Number two, something else that it can mean, I maybe lean toward this one a little bit in this context. You no longer live your life doing what other men want you to do. You don't live your life to the lust of men. See, the world would persecute these Christians to whom Peter was writing because the world wanted them to buckle. The world wanted them to renounce and forfeit their faith. The world wanted them to turn away from Jesus Christ and to praise Caesar as God. The world wanted them to do these sinful things. And Peter's saying, look, don't live the rest of the time that you have. I don't know how long you have. I don't know if you've got 5 more days, 5 more years, or 5 more decades. I don't know. I don't know how much time I've got. But Peter says, however much time you have left upon this earth, don't live it to the lust of men. Don't do what the world expects of you. He says in this verse, live it to the will of God. Do what God expects of you. See, that helps me. That should help all of us in our perspective toward the world. Because we've already alluded to Romans 12 and verse 2. The world basically is seeking to push or to press us into its mold. In Romans 12:2, when it says, be not conformed to this world, that's inherent in that Greek word, conform. It's the idea of exerted pressure, as it were, putting one into a mold. And so every day that you live and work, every day that you go to school, every time that you're around non-Christian folks, there is the potential there for you to feel this influence, for you to feel this push or this draw that the world wants you to be like they are. Now, 1 Peter 4 and verse 2 tells me how to view that. I'm reminded that I've been redeemed to live the rest of my time on this earth to the will of God. I'm not supposed to be a people pleaser. I'm not supposed to compromise my morals just to make my boss happy. I'm not supposed to compromise my righteousness just to be accepted. I'm not supposed to do that. I no longer live to the lust of men. I live to the will of God. But read on. Verse 3. He says, for the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles. Now that's King James speak. If I may, let me paraphrase that into something that we might relate to more readily here. When he says the time past of our life may suffice us, you see that word suffice? This is Peter's way of telling his readers, you have already wasted more than sufficient time living in sin. It doesn't matter whether you obeyed the gospel in your 20s, whether you obeyed the gospel in your 80s. A few years back, we baptized a lady in her 80s that I liked. It doesn't matter, Peter says, you've already wasted enough and too much of your life living in sin. That's what verse 3 begins by saying. And then he gets more specific. He even names some of these sins. He says, when we walked in lasciviousness, okay, sensual lust and lustful living, lust, evil passions or evil desires, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, all three of those sins are sins that in some way or another, to some degree or another, involve alcohol. And abominable idolatries. Peter says you used to live this way. This is what characterized who you were. And you've wasted enough time. And notice verse 4. Wherein they is the world, the people in the world. They think it strange that you run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you. If there were something that we could put in a pill, and some of you have joked with me, and I don't have one in my pocket. This week I've religiously been taking these fish oil pills. Some of you have seen that. And I think Mark saw that today, and he joked with me about popping pills out on the street. If there were something that you could put in a pill, and that we could give every one of our young people, including mine, every one of our young people, and they would swallow this pill down, and instantly it would infiltrate their system and permeate their minds. This is what I would want to go in that pill. Are you listening? You cannot be a Christian. You cannot be a Christian and expect non-Christians to understand you. Parents, we are doing our children an injustice and our grandchildren if we are not teaching them this fundamental fact and instilling that in them while they're young. Because what is the natural human inclination? The natural human tendency is, I want to be accepted. I want my friends to like me. I want my peers to accept me. I want to be part of the group. I want to fit in. And I don't know why we have been so negligent as parents and grandparents, as preachers and teachers and elders. I don't know why we haven't told our young people early in life that you either choose God or the world, but you're not going to have both. When you choose God and you live a life that is faithful and uncompromising before God, read verse 4. The world is going to think you're strange. They're going to think you're strange. The world is not going to understand your thought processes. The world is not going to understand your choices. The world is not going to understand your values system. The world is not going to understand you. And at times it's merely going to be frustrating to the world. And at other times it's going to be infuriating to the world. But regardless of the world's reaction, Peter says, you belong to God. Paul said, ye are bought with a price. Be not ye the servants of men. 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 23. Don't you serve this world. Don't give in to serve your friends. It's not working. They don't know. They don't know the score. They have no idea. That's what's sad to me. It just makes me so sad. These people out in the world, young and old, that think they are living on top of the world, they think they have the world by the tail, they are ignorant. And they have no idea. They have no idea what life is about. They have no idea what is looming ever before them in the future. They have no idea. And so we need to have a proper perspective toward the world. And that is, I'm not going to give in to what worldly, sinful people want out of me. I'm not going to be the world's puppet. I'm not going to conform, compromising my morality, compromising my righteousness, compromising my Bible convictions. I'm not going to compromise just to be accepted. Let me tell you what, young people and older people too, because I know a lot of older Christians who need to hear that. The day that you begin living life that way, in one sense, Christianity instantly becomes easier. It's not that you no longer meet with the resistance. If anything, the resistance might heighten, it might increase. But just having the resolve, just knowing that I've weighed it in the balance and I've made my decision. This is who I'm going to be. This is where I'm going to stand. And with God's grace and help, I'm going to stick to my guns. In one sense, it becomes easier from that point. Because see, now you're no longer flirting with the possibility. Compromise is no longer now an option that you weigh in your mind and you have to think it through and say, well, what if? Just what if I gave in this one time? Wouldn't this be... You don't have to worry about that anymore. Because from 1 Peter chapter 4, you have the proper perspective of the world. You don't serve the world. You serve and you love God. And not only does life become easier in a sense once you make that conviction, but guess what? That's when you will start winning souls to the kingdom. See, so long as we're half-hearted, complacent, lackadaisical, blending in with everybody around us, it's no surprise we don't win souls. There's nothing distinctive about you. There's nothing distinctive about me in that condition that the world has no reason to be drawn to us. They have no reason to listen to us. They have no reason. But when we become settled in our conviction, we live a holy, faithful life. Oh, that's when we begin doing good. We begin winning souls for the one who has won us. Let's close our Bibles. We'll take our songbooks out and you can prepare to follow along on the screen. Friends, holiness is not easy. I didn't decide to preach on holiness tonight because holiness is an easy part of the Christian life. In essence, holiness is one of the most difficult parts of the Christian life. Being different, being distinctive for the sake of service unto God. But friends, I'll tell you this, none of us will see God without holiness. Hebrews 12 and verse 14. None of us. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they, the pure in heart, they shall see God. Matthew 5 and verse 8. And I tell you again, heaven will surely be worth it all. Friend, if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, we're challenging you, but we're encouraging you to make the most important decision that you can make. And that is to place your faith in Jesus Christ. Believe in Him. Repent. Make the conscious decision to turn away from the practice of sin. Come and you can make the good confession with your mouth that Jesus is who He said He was. And tonight, put on Jesus in baptism in order to wash away your past sins by His shed blood. Brother or sister, if you've done those things, but tonight, in your heart of hearts, you would have to say, I've not been meeting the call for holiness. I've not been transformed by the renewing of my mind. I've been conformed to this world. I've been living like the world, dressing, speaking, acting like the world. I'm just one of the world. I'm just showing up at church services. But the good news is the blood of Jesus has the remedy for that also. Why not rededicate your heart and your life tonight in penitence? Turn away from that sin in your life. As you confess sin, we'll pray with you and for you. And God will forgive you. The true grace of God is your remedy if you'll only respond to it on His terms. Won't you come as we stand?